for children. It's really taking their life away from them. But that whole idea of consciousness is very important. Thank you. Yes?
I'm not sure this is a question, but a comment on what you said about the direction of education with the custodian and professionalizing aspects of life. I read that someone had said that previous to the printing press, that when people went to church, they just stood around. There were no benches or things. You just stood like a bunch of graves. And that after the printing press, sometime after, like neat little rows of type, there came these benches that everyone sat on and kneeled at and so on. And this person said that now we have these computers and the internet, and he said it's as much of a technological transformation of world history as the printing press was. And he said our children are there, and he said if we don't enter this and figure out what to do with this, we're going to lose our children. And I've often tried to think, well, what does that mean? We just put them all in front of computers and get on the internet and speak to people in China? You know what I mean? Like, but I think that you perhaps answered that in a certain way, of a possibility of how do we come out of the classroom of neat rows, even if they're neatly in a circle.
Well, I think it's also, that all of these things, again, they're kind of invisible forms of communication. And you want the children, you hope before they do that sort of thing, that they've learned as a class how to commune with each other. We want communion in a time of communication. We really want a sense of unity in a time of excessive fragmentation. And I agree with you that, offices are starting to change, and the way people work has changed, that so many people can work from home or work from wherever they are if they have a computer or a PDA or something like that. That's going to be a very different world for our children to go into. And we still are, in a certain respect, preparing them for the office existence that's been the hallmark of people's lives since the time of the Renaissance. Even the work that Steiner said characterized modern human life, Faust, the first stage direction in this poetic play is Faust in his study, sitting at a desk. That is really modern life. That's what it's about, but that's changing. It's not going to be that way. What would a modern Faust have? Faust in a plane looking at his iPhone or something like that. To really be true to the nature of the modern person striving with the Mephistophelian forces, it's a much more mobile sort of thing.
Eugene, you and perhaps others are familiar with what I can only roughly paraphrase, this relatively now famous citing of a particular statement from Steiner about the gramophone, that with something, and again, I know you mentioned the motor car, but I think you meant this is in the spirit of it. With the motor car, you can live with motor cars and still, in a certain sense, have a free relationship. You can work with it if you work with it, and not necessarily be damaged, so to speak. But with the gramophone, when art is being brought down into, is being imprisoned in a certain sense in technology, only the spiritual world, if it so wills, can help, if it so wills. That human beings who have a certain propensity for enjoying or being drawn into this actually can't help themselves. We're not at the state of evolution where we can actually help ourselves. What would you say to that vis-a-vis this whole question of the dynamics between Lucifer and Ahriman and vis-a-vis the curriculum?
Well, that's it. The gramophone, almost all of the media, it's sort of a constant give and take and sometimes battle between the Ahrimanic and Luciferic forces. that it is at present, it's pretty much devoid of this sort of green area there, the green zone, as they call it, where you really don't feel that the spiritual world from on high is able to enter into it. We have to find that. A couple of other things that Steiner said about the media. One is that he said he was asked if his lectures could be transmitted by radio. And he said they could be if at the other end, at the receiver end, there was a flame set up in such a way that the lecturer's voice would move that flame. Now, I don't think he just meant in the sense that a vibration would do that. You know, you have a boom box and it'll make things shake and vibrate or break glass. But that there'd have to be some way of bringing that flame quality, which really unites the living and the lifeless in a very beautiful way. So it's not that he said no, unthinkable, but there'd have to be an objective correlative which would remind us there's spiritual activity that goes on in speech. So the flame would have to be doing a kind of eurythmy. He also, from what I have read on a number of occasions, I don't know to whom this was attributed, the original statement of this, that Steiner was talking with one of the great eurythmy composers at the end of his life about doing a movie together. And he said to him, it's not that the cinema itself is at fault, it's the way it's being used and it's the content. So I wonder what that would have looked like. You know, there are just very, I don't know that there's any hard and fast. The thing about the gramophone, definitely, there's a strong statement. But I think, again, that all of this was in such a state of birth and genesis and changing so much. And certainly it's not as though Steiner went to electronics stores and, you know, shopped around to see what was there. I think he probably only had a fairly limited exposure to many of these things. In the same way that he gave forms for poems that were brought to him. He didn't necessarily go out and choose the poems himself. Had he lived longer, who knows where that might have gone.
It might be that if the students are guided correctly, that the technologies could be demystified in their own being to the point where they could actually recognize the reality of art and how it cannot, in a certain sense, interrelate, and how it can if it can, and how it can't. But through